We started by talking about conviction review units and the prosecutorial role as it extends beyond conviction. And later on in the day, the next panel will be looking at the role of funding for indigent defense. But in between, we wanted to put on our last profile of innovation, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Zane Memeger from now Morgan Lewis, but formerly, and until very recently, the United States Attorney here for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. Zane served in that capacity for the full 8 years, I think, of the Obama administration,
About
correct?
7 years.
7 years of that, and has really been a steady hand at the tiller. He's also the best left fielder a guy could ask for in a slow-pitch softball league, which you may not know. But he's going to talk about the most important performance metrics for prosecutors based on his time leading that office for the 7-year period. Zane?
Thanks, John, for that kind introduction. It's truly a pleasure to be here with you today. I've spent my time practicing law, splitting time between the private sector, being at Morgan Lewis, and being a prosecutor with the Department of Justice. I spent 11 years as an assistant United States attorney, and then I spent 7 years as the United States attorney in charge of the office, an office of about 130 prosecutors. And what I'd like to do is talk to you a little bit about how my mindset changed in terms of how do you measure success within an office from the time I was a young prosecutor to the time I walked out the door back in December of last year. I joined the U.S. Attorney's Office back in 1995 as an assistant United States attorney. I was a young prosecutor. I was 30 years old. I'm concerned about how do you get evaluated, how does the office go about doing cases. And one of the things that you were notified pretty early on as an AUSA is you were required to have 10 indictments per year. That was the benchmark in terms of what you were going to try and accomplish in terms of the investigations that you got assigned to. But you wanted to try and get 10 indictments a year. You had an office of about 130 attorneys, and at that point in time, the office was indicting about 700 to 800 cases a year. And of those cases, about 40–45% involved narcotics or violent crime, firearm cases. And there's constantly requests coming in from the Department of Justice as to what are you doing on your different program levels to provide information back to the department, but also that information is getting provided to Congress in order to assess whether or not the Department of Justice is truly doing its job, what type of money should be being provided to the Department of Justice in order to effectuate its mission. You're looking at different statistics in terms of what's going on in the city. You're looking at what's going on in homicides. You're looking at what's going on in shootings. When I came into Philadelphia back in 1991, I recall the number of homicides per year was about 500 murders per year. Shootings were pretty substantial. When I came back to the office as the United States Attorney back in 2010, the city of Philadelphia was experiencing between anywhere from 1,300 to 1,500 shootings per year. And then you're looking at what your colleagues are doing at the district attorney's office and at the police department. And there are a very effective group of individuals in the police department and the district attorney's office. And we had a tremendous partnership from the time that I was Assistant United States Attorney, but even after I became United States Attorney in 2010, that was a relationship that I truly wanted to foster and grow with the idea that we were going to focus in on improving community safety and how do you go about improving community safety. But the important thing for me back in year one was I was always thinking about community safety in the sense of how many arrests are you doing? How many people are you charging? How many defendants are you convicting each year? That's how you define community safety. And if you're hitting certain benchmarks in that regard, you are effectively keeping the community safe. But over the course of time, I realized that's not how you ensure community safety. There's always going to be the next case, there's always going to be the next individual defendant, but you got to start thinking about how is the community truly being impacted? What's the quality of life within those communities? What's the general experience within those communities in terms of the school day-to-day activity? That's what you need to be focusing in on. It just can't be solely about the numbers in terms of how many people you're charging each year. Over the course of my career, homicides have dropped dramatically in Philadelphia. But I want to focus in on the sort of period between 2010 and 2016, where the number of homicides, in fact, dropped down below 300 per year. And that's very significant when I think about what it was like back in 1990-91 when I came to Philadelphia, that we were able through some of our efforts to get the numbers down below 300. But these numbers don't tell you everything about what's going on in a place like Philadelphia. It tells you that part of your enforcement efforts have been successful because the numbers have come down, but can you continue focusing in on investigating prosecution in order to get the numbers down even further? And I think the unfortunate answer to that question is no, that prosecutors can continue to arrest people, they can continue to indict people, they can continue to prosecute people, but something else is going on now because we've gotten to a point where the numbers are fairly steady and you have prosecutors and police officers throughout the city working very diligently and very hard to investigate and prosecute cases in an effort to keep the community safe. Here's where I think the rub is in terms of things that prosecutors are being asked to do in terms of trying to ensure community safety. But the reality is that there are certain factors beyond a prosecutor's control. You're dealing with issues like poverty. You're dealing with a place like the city of Philadelphia. In the city of Philadelphia, there are portions of this community where poverty is at 46%. The average poverty level in Philadelphia is 26%. You go into other certain parts of the communities, there's a lack of job opportunities. People want to work, but they can't find those job opportunities. Educational opportunities. They want to go to school. We've got a school system that is not functioning like it should. I live outside of Philadelphia. I live out in Delaware County. My kids go to a fantastic public school. It's like getting a college education from the day they walk in as freshmen to the time they walk out as seniors. Kids here in Philadelphia don't have those opportunities. They should have those opportunities, and that's a question that we as public citizens need to be asking. Where do we want to invest our money? Do we want to continue investing our money in prisons, or do we want to start rethinking where we invest our monies and put our money up front in education where we can hopefully give those individuals the opportunities to learn and get educated so that they don't end up in the criminal justice system. You got issues with regard to stability at home. You've got issues with regard to mental health and drug treatment facilities. Law enforcement is being asked to deal with mental health problems that they effectively can't deal with. But mental health facilities continuously are being closed, and those individuals are not getting the assistance and help that they need. And then law enforcement is being asked to address those questions and those issues. We know from studies that have been done that kids who are continuously exposed to violence during the course of their life have a tendency to engage in those activities as they get older. We need to figure out ways to deal with those type of issues as well. The reality is people adapt to survive in the reality of their environment. During the course of my career, one of the things I started to focus in on as United States Attorney was the issue of reentry. And one of the things that we did was I met a young filmmaker, a guy by the name of L. Sawyer. And L. Sawyer had been convicted of aggravated robbery, and he spent a significant time up in Graterford. And during the course of his time in Graterford, he learned filmmaking. And I met him in 2010. and he's a very dynamic individual. And it was hard for me to believe that here I am, a prosecutor, hardcore. I've investigated and prosecuted serious cases, and I'm sitting down with an individual who's been convicted of a serious offense. But with the idea that our common goal was, you had the experience of having gone through this life, gone into prison, come out and tried to make yourself successful, and I need to tap into that because we need to get this dialogue about reentry and the importance of reentry out there, and you can help me do that. And so we provided him with $30,000 in funding, a Department of Justice fund, to put together a film called The Pull of Gravity. It's a fantastic film about the issues of men coming home, tells the story of 3 individuals. But there's a scene in that movie where they're up in North Philadelphia and they're talking about the environment that people live in up in North Philadelphia and how the people there in North Philadelphia truly are good. And one of El Sawyer's friends is talking about his experience up in North Philadelphia and basically explaining that we are in a state of depression. We are truly in a state of depression based on the lack of jobs, the lack of educational opportunities, the lack of a future for us here in North Philadelphia. And that if you were to give people an opportunity in that neighborhood, 80% of those people would do good if they were given the opportunity to succeed. But they don't have that opportunity, and they are dealing with the realities of their environment. During the course of my time, I had an opportunity to work with tremendous agencies in addition to the District Attorney's Office and the Philadelphia Police Department. We had resources at the FBI, we had resources at the Drug Enforcement Administration, the Bureau of Alcohol and Tobacco and Firearms. And so in the summer of 2012, we came up with an initiative that we launched in the 22nd Police District. And it was the Violent Crime Reduction Partnership. And from a numbers perspective, it was very successful. We partnered up with our fellow agencies. We did a concentrated investigation and prosecution effort in the summer of 2012, and the numbers speak for themselves. 77 indictments, 92 defendants charged by my office. ATF made numerous arrests along with the FBI and DEA. U.S. Marshals arrested a lot of people. From a numbers perspective, it was a great effort from the Department of Justice perspective in terms of bringing law enforcement resources to bear on what we viewed as a significant community safety problem. But that was really just a piece of what was going on in the community. There were other aspects, which I've touched upon a little bit, that need to be addressed in order to really ensure community safety. And these numbers don't even address those issues. It started coming to light that in order to be really successful in ensuring community safety, you had to start thinking beyond just the numbers of I'm indicting cases, I'm prosecuting cases, we're locking people up. That wasn't going to be the way to go. What you really needed to start thinking about was what are you doing on the front end of things in terms of prevention, working with schools, getting engagement between the law enforcement officers and the young people in those communities to start building that trust in those communities so that they would assist you with regard to the investigation, the prosecutions that you wanted to pursue, but you also wanted to have them understand that we're not here to lock people up. We really care and want you to succeed. That's where we should be directing our resources. So one of the things that my office did was we developed a partnership with Strawberry Mansion High School. It was a perpetually dangerous high school, and we developed a working relationship with them. And we would go in there as prosecutors to teach them about civics, but put in youth courts and things of that nature to develop school pride and opportunities for them to take control of their environment in terms of their day-to-day activities and build respect upon one another. And by making that investment and working with the principals in that school came off the perpetually dangerous list. More kids started to graduate from the high school and go on to additional education, whether or not it was community college or a four-year college or a technical school, but they were starting to see that there was a way out. And that was an investment that we were willing to make, recognizing that that helps with regard to community safety. Another thing we started thinking about was, what about the men coming home into a district? You can take two approaches. One, you can say, fine, welcome back into the community, good luck. Or you can say, look, you're coming back in the community. I, as a prosecutor, don't want to put impediments up in your way. I want to try and help you succeed in terms of reintegrating into the community. And so we started what was known as a call-in program, where it's a sort of two-part message. One, we're going to be watching you. So if you violate, we're going to take all appropriate steps to investigate and prosecute you. But at the same time, if you want to take advantage of opportunities to succeed, we're going to try and provide you with resources, whether or not it's education, job training, cognitive behavior assistance, things that you need in terms of housing, all those different pieces to try and help you get back on your feet. And this dovetailed with the federal program that we had already been doing with regard to reentry, the STAR program, Supervision to Aid Reentry, where we had been working with men who had been convicted of violent crimes coming back from their federal sentences back into the community, where we saw that where you make that investment and you invest those resources, you can get recidivism rates down significantly, where these men who participate in these programs had a recidivism rate of about 11% versus a recidivism rate of 55, 60, 65%. And from a federal prosecutor's perspective, that's a huge win, because that means I don't have to worry about spending my resources investigating and prosecuting those cases. I can truly focus in on dealing with the worst of the worst in terms of the individuals that we are focusing in on as prosecutors. In summer 2013, Department of Justice announces Smart on Crime initiative, and it was going to be a rethinking of the way the Department of Justice was going to approach its enforcement efforts in terms of narcotics and violent crime. We're going to prioritize cases in terms of focusing in on the worst of the worst. We're going to rethink how we applied mandatory minimums in terms of our charging decisions. We're going to work on the issues involving reentry and focus in on helping those men coming back into the community try to achieve success. And then we're going to use our resources in a targeted fashion to surge resources into a community in order to investigate and prosecute the appropriate people. And that, for me, was an effective way to try and ensure community safety, because it allowed our prosecutors to engage with the community and understand what's going on in the community. I was a federal prosecutor. I lived in an ivory tower. I lived out in Delaware County. My prosecutors live in all the various counties. They don't live in the communities and where you're investigating and prosecuting cases, but you're there investigating and prosecuting cases without a full understanding of all the dynamics that are in play. But this method allowed our prosecutors to start going into those communities and starting to understand those communities and the pressures that were going on in the community, whether or not it was in the schools, whether or not it was in the community in terms of how they were trying to deal with the drug trafficking activity that might be surrounding them or the violent crime that was surrounding them. But it allowed an actual dialogue so that we could figure out how best to address those cases in terms of targeting our resources appropriately. We wanted to try and do impactful cases, and it got away from quantity, as I mentioned, in terms of how many cases was an AUSA charging a year, how many cases was the office charging a year, but let's focus in on, are we getting the right people and targeting the right people in the federal system in terms of violent crime and drug cases. Take a look at the recidivism rate. I already talked a little bit about the STAR program and the success of the STAR program, but that was something else that you were going to measure success by. how many people were not going back into the criminal justice system after appropriately serving their time. Then you also wanted to take a look at the school environment and the quality of life in the community at large. We focused in on Strawberry Mansion. When we went into Strawberry Mansion, it's a devastated neighborhood. Shootings were really high, homicides were really high, but through our concentrated efforts working with our law enforcement partners, the shootings came down, the homicides came down, but remarkably, the quality of life improved. And it didn't necessarily equate with the number of people that were getting arrested and locked up every day, but it was how did the community feel about the environment in which they were living in. They were now, during the summer, kids were out there on the street having fun. They were having barbecues. They were interacting with one another. Their quality of life had improved dramatically. There's still crime going on, but that crime was being driven by things that were beyond a prosecutor's control, and that's why it takes a community effort to start focusing in on things like education, jobs, and other things of that nature. But for me, as a prosecutor, measuring success started to focus more on how's the community doing? How do they feel about law enforcement? Do they feel that they have a partnership with law enforcement in that community? Do they feel that law enforcement is working with them to address their needs and effectively pursuing the worst of the worst so that that community can thrive? I've been losing a lot of sleep since I walked out of the Department of Justice in December. I was getting ready for this presentation, and I hopped on the internet to track down information about things that I had worked on as U.S. Attorney. And you type in "smart on crime" on the DOJ website, it pops up, and all you see is this information has been archived. They are trying to erase what we have done over the last 7 years in terms of trying to improve community safety. They want to go back to a world in which we investigate and prosecute cases, but let's not think about prevention. Let's not think about reentry. Let's investigate and prosecute, because if we do that successfully, communities will be more safe. But I know, based on my experience, that there's so many different factors that are in play that if they're not addressed, community safety is not anywhere to be had. And so I think it's really incumbent on all of us to make sure that we hold our prosecutors, our law enforcement officials accountable, to make sure that they are doing things in the best interest of the community, focusing in on prevention, focusing in on reentry, but also doing their traditional job of investigating and prosecuting cases, but doing it in an appropriate way to ensure community safety. So I truly want to thank John for the invitation to speak today. It's been an honor and privilege. I've always enjoyed coming to the Quattrone Center and having an opportunity to present on different issues, and today isn't any different. So thank you for your time and attention very much.